Hello everybody and welcome to Nifty 50 Photographers. I'm Richard Gill, I'm a professional photographer. Today's video we're going to talk about food photography. Now, who doesn't love taking a picture of their great meals they have out when they go to a restaurant or something and sharing it on Instagram? And I'm going to talk you through how to do that. This is really aimed at beginners. It's going to tell you the basics of how to get started, and we're going to use a very simple setup just using natural light. We're just going to use daylight, no artificial props or anything like that. And I'm going to set up a simple scene and show you how I would photograph it. And let's talk about the first thing you would need. Now, I mentioned we are going to use natural light, so what you want to find is a window, and ideally one that faces north. Of course, not every house has that, but if you haven't, I've got one that faces east, which is what I'm going to use. Just make sure you haven't got direct sunlight streaming through it, because that will be very harsh and that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for a big soft light source. Now, if you've got a window that does face south or west and perhaps you've got the sun beaming through, you can easily get around that. Just hang a white sheet over it, something to diffuse the light as it comes through. You can even buy photographic diffusers, but there's no need to go that far. Just a white sheet or even something like parchment paper will help to diffuse the light and soften it up. I'll show you what my setup looks like. So the next thing you want is to have your camera at 90 degrees to the light source. And this is what I mean. I'll do this little sketch that shows you the layout. I've got my subject in the middle, got my light source coming in from the left-hand side, and my camera at 90 degrees to that. I'd like to talk a little bit about the equipment we use. Sorry about this light fitting that's in the way. My ceilings are really low in this. We live in an old 17th century cottage, so this is the kind of problem I have to face. I keep banging my head. Anyway, that aside, so first of all you'd need, obviously, I usually use my camera and I mount it on a tripod. Now the reason I do that is really to help me with composition. You can probably get a fast enough shutter speed with the aperture we're going to use to get away with it if you've got good light coming in. But if you haven't, then a tripod really helps to reduce that camera shake. But the other thing, it will help you with composition. One thing you find with food photography, you fiddle about moving things around a little bit. It's really nice just to have your camera in exactly the same position. Just go up, change your scene a little bit, and then you can take another photograph with a slightly different setup very easily. Now, other things that you will find handy is to have some backgrounds. Now you can buy these are from a company called Photo Boards in the UK, but there are lots of companies who make photographic backgrounds. They don't usually cost very much. These cost about 20 to 30 pounds, I think, depending on the size. They do a small one like this, and they do bigger ones like this, which I think are about 2 feet square or 60 centimeters square. So those you will find useful. But you can also use other things, you know, just nice textiles, things that have texture in them. So, for example, I have a kit of bits and pieces I've collected, and I have things in it like an old coffee sack, because that gives you a lovely, nice textured background. So all those kind of things you can use. Go along to places like car boot sales, junkyard sales, charity shops, and you'll pick up lots of nice things. There's no need to spend a lot of money. The other thing that you will find handy is to have some materials to reflect light or block light. Now again, you don't need to spend much money. You can just buy some white Fomex card. Go along to your local art supplies shop or hobby shop, and they should have this in big and little sheets, and you can use this to reflect light. And the same thing, if you buy a black one, then you can use that to block the light, and that will help with things when you've got like unwanted reflections. So let's set up our scene now, and I've just bought a little pudding from my local supermarket. I'm going to make a nice cup of coffee, just set up a little scene to do that, and I'll talk you through what camera settings I use. I'm not going to dwell too much on composition because that's a whole deep subject for food photography. But if this is something you're really interested in, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Let me know if food photography and all the food photography composition techniques that you need would be an interesting video for you, and that's something I can make in the future. I've got my little scene set up, and I'll also record that so you can see what's going on there. So for my camera settings, so what I'm going to do here now is think about what I want to be the dominant component in the scene. So for my first shot, I want the little lemon cheesecake to be the star of the show. So I'm going to focus on that, and I'm going to choose a wideish aperture so that the coffee cup at the back of the scene is a little bit blurred and not dominating at all. Now I might do a second shot where we do it the other way around. Now I've deliberately chosen backgrounds that are high contrast. And actually, as I'm videoing this, you'll see the shadows are falling the wrong way because I've got a light on the other side just to give me enough light for video. But I'll turn that off as I photograph it so the shadows will be falling the other way. Let me do that and you can see what I mean. And now you can see how the shadows will fall in the actual photograph. And then the rest of it is really about just being a little bit picky about where you want things, about setting up your framing exactly as you'd like it. I've got a fixed 90mm lens on here. A very good lens for this would be your nifty 50, and that would be my other choice. I just love my 90mm lens. It allows me to do some little close-ups as well, little macro shots if I wanted to as well, which is why I've gone with that one. But you could use even your kit lens, and I'm going to choose an aperture probably about f4 to start with, because I do want to keep a bit of depth in the scene, and the plate that the cheesecake on is relatively taking up quite a bit of the scene. I'd like that to all stay in focus and the focus to fall off as it gets back towards the coffee mug. And I like the idea of the light shining in from the side on the coffee mug, and having a white background behind it will reflect some light in it. It's a clear mug, so it's nice to get that sort of nice reflection back into the liquid. And backlighting is one of the few things you can do if you're photographing liquids. Rest of the time you're much better with side lighting. I wouldn't ever usually front light something other than just to get a little bit of reflection. So that's how I've set things up. I've also been quite picky about where I put the handles. So I'm arranging them on diagonals just so that they cut through as a diagonal in my framing. The eyes love diagonals. If you haven't seen my previous video about that, I'll link to that so you can see where you should use diagonals in your composition. The rest of it is about your other compositional rules, like rule of thirds, isolating your subject, and those kind of things. And I have a playlist with lots of composition rules in it, and I'll link to that as well. So let's take this first shot, and we'll maybe change the setup a little bit. Now the other thing you've got to try and do with your photos when you're doing food shots is try and balance them a little bit. So if you imagine an imaginary line right up and down the middle, and then look at the photo, does it balance? You know, I've got a big dominant item here in the cheesecake, so that's dominating one half, and I've balanced up the other half with these items here, and I've just used the coffee beans to try and get the eye to be drawn round in a bit of a circle, so that you keep the viewer interested within the frame. The other thing you're trying to do is create a story, which is where the coffee beans add in. So I'm trying to do somebody having dessert and coffee. That's the story I'm taking in this photo. Sorry, I'm going down on my knees. It's a bit easier to see what's going on through the camera. And then the last thing I would do, I would switch to manual focus and focus on the very item you want. So I'm going to do that by focusing right in on the cheesecake. Okay, I'm going to grab that shot, change my setup, and do one more. And if you're shooting from a tripod, I would recommend you use a remote release. You could turn off your steady shot or camera stabilization as well, so that it's not fooled by the tripod, and set a delay on your shutter if you're not using a remote release. I've got a 2-second delay on my shutter to avoid any camera shake. Right, now let me change the setup and have a different scene. So for this scene, I've done exactly the opposite. I've made the coffee the star of the show. So it really depends about, as I say, what story you want to sell. Again, I'm using a aperture f4, so it's going to blur the little pudding into the background, because the thing I want to make dominant in this scene is the coffee. I'm going to play around with a few more coffee beans just to see if that makes it a bit more interesting. One other tip I could give you when you're trying to do this composition, make sure you've got your rule of thirds grid on, and then you can carve up the frame and see which elements you want maybe on an intersection and which you don't. That'll really help you with your composition. And use your live view screen so that you're looking at what's going on. Make your little tweaks, come back and have a look. If you're happy, then you can take your shot. Now there's one other thing we could try here to make the scene perhaps a little bit more interesting. Let's play around with a reflector just to get some little highlights in the scene. Technically they're called specular highlights, and those little dots of light just brighten up the image and draw the eye in a bit. And so I'll do that as my next shot. Now I'm going to use this reflector, and it's a mixture of gold and silver, but as I say, you can just use a piece of white card, and I can just shine some light, catch the light coming in from the window, hitting the reflector, and bounce it into my scene. And let me film on the other camera, and then you can see what effect that has. So this is no reflector. Now as I move the reflector in, you can see, and I move it over, you can see how the light is shining on and off the top of the coffee. If I move further back, I can do the same with the little cheesecake at the back. So I'm going to have a little play with that. This is ideally where you want an assistant or a camera with a flip out screen, so you can look at the screen at the same time and see that you're getting an effect you like. I'm going to take a shot with this, and then I'm probably going to do a couple more with slightly different apertures to change the emphasis of the photo, of whether I want the background to go blurred or not, or whether I want all three elements in focus. I'll share those with you in just a second. I'd love to see some of the photos you've created. You can put them on Instagram and tag me. Here's my handle below. It's at Gill Photography. Or you can share them in our Facebook group, the Nifty 50 Photographers Facebook group, and I'll be happy to give you my feedback. Food photography is something that requires a little bit of patience and a little bit of practice, like everything else in photography, but it can be a great thing and a lot of fun. And I hope you've enjoyed it. And so go out, find some nice food to photograph, and the best thing about it is, if you don't mess about with it too much, you can eat it at the end. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.